Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LinkedIn Live presentation or the streaming of the Inventory Visibility app. I hope you can see the screen and hear me. I will get some kind of notification if you don't, I hope. So let's get started. First of all, thank you for joining. It's a perfect topic on a Friday lunch to go through calculated measurements for calculating global visibility into on-hand information. And I'm really happy to see you here. First of all, I'm just going to give a brief introduction into the Visibility app and myself, and a quick walkthrough of the components and how to get started with testing. I aim for this session to be a little bit more practical. There are already a number of sessions and a lot of material covering the initial setup of the Visibility app and how to install the components and how to configure Azure AD, etc. So I'm not going to go into that. I will try to focus on new functionality as much as possible, the latest with soft reservations, etc. And jump in a little bit quickly, I hope, at least into the demo here. And then hopefully we'll have time to round up some questions at the end. So brief agenda. Well, quickly about myself. My name is Gustav. I'm also I work as a senior technical architect for Engage Group or Business Engagement Group. I have a quite long history, depends on who you compare with AX and 365 and many business applications. But I've been working with AX since about 2007 and been very leaning into retail, but a lot of supply chain oriented and also finance areas. But being a little bit leaning towards retail, the on-hand, the global visibility of on-hand is a favorite or one of my favorite topics because it's always a big challenge in many organizations to have this, like the global visibility. A very common scenario is that one business area has one version of the truth, so to speak, and another has another version due to a lot of reasons. The batch nature of full snapshot replicas of on hand, and you have different sales. Sometimes you have different POS applications as well. So this topic is a favorite of mine. So I hope we'll be able to cover a lot of your questions. And speaking of questions, there is a Q&A at the end. There might be a little bit of a delay here in the LinkedIn session. So if you have a question, please write it in the chat. Even if I cover it later on in the session, it doesn't matter, then we can just bring it up. But don't wait until the question section to write your question because there might be a little bit of a delay for us to pick it up. So just write it as soon as you have it and I'll try to answer. Right, moving on to the fun stuff, the overview of the Visibility app. So what is Inventory Visibility? It has been available for quite some time now, generally available at least. So I'm hoping that if you're here eating your lunch and listening to me, that you know what it is. But if not, a quick overview is it's scalable solution for querying on hand and performing soft reservation. That last part is something we're going to clarify shortly, I hope. But basically, it's a microservice. It's to simplify it a little bit, it's a microservice that is listening to a number of data sources. It's tied a little bit to F&O 365. Because of the, well, it's a Microsoft service, but it's the purpose of the Visibility app is to provide a global insight into your on hand, which means that it can speak to different data sources. You can have a number of any source, actually. You can connect it to the Visibility app and thereby providing one central location to cover as near real time as possible. Near real time is also another favorite saying that we'll have to. I'm going to show you exactly how many seconds near real time actually translates to in those scenarios in a little while. But what it is, it's that we're taking a snapshot of InventSum, the on-hand information, and we're building up the Dataverse tables. So coming into the architecture shortly here, but we're taking a snapshot, and then basically the F&O part of the visibility, it will replicate on-hand updates automatically, low-level replication, nothing you can do about it. It's going to replicate everything as it is over to the Visibility app. And there we use Dataverse. So a better understanding of how that might look is this architecture here. We have some other components here, but basically if you start over here, you have your Dynamics instance, right? And it's batch controlled. favorite feature of all, batch service, meaning that it's not instant. So it's a very important thing to understand here. It's oriented around batch replication. So the closest to real time you might get is a minute, because that's the lowest recurrence you can set the batch job to run. But still, that's as near real time as you can get between F&O and visibility. And then visibility and other sources, that's depending on your scenario, of course. But it's all controlled export-wise from Dynamics. I quickly read the text on LinkedIn. Says that we're going to discuss reservations done towards Dynamics. It's a good thing that we mentioned that, because that we're going to clarify how that works. So this is a one-way integration, really, between Dynamics and the visibility, as you can see by this arrow here. We are sending data from Dynamics to the visibility app. And if you can imagine any other ERP here, you could have SAP or Oracle Retail or whatever system of your choice will also have a one-way arrow here downstream to visibility, because the purpose of the application is to gather as a central repository the truth about your operations, how much is reserved, how much is on hand, how much is coming in. It is not to actually perform the reservations in the actual operative system here. So it's going to be a bit more clear when we get into the demo, but I just want to get that out of the way quickly, that we are not, inventory visibility is not performing reservation operations towards Dynamics. It's performing reservation operations towards itself. So with that said, once we have all the data here, now we are over in Dataverse. So lighting up a whole range of different integration scenarios and capabilities that you can use very easily by just setting up the integration. So that's, for me, that's kind of the key strength here. Even if you might not want to use it fully for different scenarios, just getting that scalability that you get with Dataverse, and very easily actually to get it up and running, at least from an F&O perspective, because you have a lot of default setup done. Depends on, of course, how much on your master data, as always. But it's going to be clear once we get into the setup part here. But from an architecture perspective, it's pushing data towards Dataverse and the application. And from here, depending on how much you want to send or how much you want to give access to Dataverse, you can actually just give the raw and some data snapshot and make it available for all of the different components you can use here: bulk storage, Azure SQL Server, Cosmos DB, etc. So that's one way of doing it, or cutting it. In this architecture slide, I've also included, just for clarity, you have a number of other options to push data out, like the data lake storage or the BYOD. So this is another component that you can use, the visibility app, to make visible your inventory, so to speak. Right? And this is live streaming, so my pause for questions just means you can write questions. I won't see them until the end of the Q&A. So as I said before, this has been live, or generally available. I don't remember when it was GA, but it has been in preview at least since the beginning of the year. So there's already been a lot of good sessions on this, on how to get it up installed, how to set up Azure AD with the client ID and secret, etc., and how to configure it. So I aim to have a little bit more of a practical approach here, but I still need to go through the basics of getting it up and running, and then how to kind of test the APIs and use the Power Apps to configure and set up, and what the level of scalability and flexibility that you get here in the visibility app. So first things first, some prerequisites here is that you cannot have this running on a cloud-hosted environment. You have to have an implementation project for it. So at the minimum, a tier 2 environment, so you have an Azure SQL. And the point is, and the reason is, of course, it's very tied into the LCS and the Power Platform Dataverse sync or connectability. So at least the last time I spoke to the product team, there was no plans to bring this into any cloud-hosted implementation, or so you can have a one box with visibility, because that's not how it works. It's built for scalability and Dataverse. So you need to have an implementation project, minimum tier 2. And it would be best if the version of your environment is on 22 and up. I'll show you why in a short while, but you can gain access to it if you're on previous versions as well. It's just that the installation is a little bit more cumbersome, but you can get it. But you cannot use the reservation offsets and the soft reservations until you're on version 22, I believe. So you need to set up a connection to Dataverse via LCS. Again, a topic that is covered very well in the documentation, so I'm not going to go through it now. I'm just going to assume that you have it. And once you have that connection up, so you have a D365 environment here in LCS, and you have a Dataverse environment, most likely called the same thing in Dataverse, then you're able to actually install the plugin, and you also need to enable the features in FNO to use it, basically. Right, and this is very easy setup and quickly done from a proof of concept perspective. So if you want to get started in testing this, it's not cumbersome to get it up and running. So again, via LCS, you install the add-in. I'm going to show you this a little bit shortly. You need to configure the features, and you set up what is called an initial push. It's exactly what it sounds like. When you enable the add-in, it's going to send a replication of your indent sum and your transactions, and from that point it will start sending delta. Basically every minute it'll send delta of transactions towards Dataverse. So the initial push might be time consuming, of course, in a production environment with a heavy transactional load. Plan that accordingly and make sure you test it properly in your lower tier environments. You also need to configure the setup in Dataverse, and this is where you might be spending a lot of your time depending on your setup. I'm going to show you again. Here's where you kind of tie it together, because if you have FNO only, that might make things more simple, because then you only need to match whatever inventory dimensions you're using. You need to map it towards your site and the warehouse hierarchies. You need to kind of configure the system to match your business requirements in a way that because this is what I'm going to show you now is Contoso. So everything is like, yeah, it works nice. You might not have the same business requirement as Contoso. So be prepared to spend a little time here to set up the Dataverse. And that's only for FNO. If you want to have additional data sources, you need to translate them as well to match, because otherwise you get an incoherent story when you kind of ask the visibility app. You want it to be agnostic of whatever system is passing data to it or asking for a global visibility. Otherwise, you kind of miss the point. And again, to get it tested and to understand how this works, I would implore you to set up a testing tools. It's very easy. Again, the product team of the Visibility app has provided templates. You can quickly import Postman templates to get started to understand how it works, and you can use Power Automate by installing the application. If you're on version 22 and you are installing the add-in for the first time, it will automatically set everything up for you in Dataverse. It will install the application. So you get a lot done. As you see here, installed yesterday. That's because I had been playing around a bit too much with this. I had too much fun, so I had to kind of uninstall everything and get it up to speed to get the demo up and running. And I did it yesterday. So it's quite easy to get it up and running from a proof of concept perspective. And then it all boils down to your needs and how complex your model is and how many sites and warehouses, etc. But getting up and running, if you have a tier 2 environment, don't worry about it. It's quite easy. And you can you can use any tool, Postman, Power Automate, Visual Studio, etc., as long as you get the authentication working. Right. And again, so in the visibility part, in the Power Apps component, this is where you'll have to spend a little time to match it to your needs. You need to set up the dimension mapping, the data sources, and soft reservations. We can take it quickly now, and it will be clear when I show you the soft reservation. The soft component here is that it's not reserving anything in the FNO data source. If we have only the FNO, we have inventory visibility. The soft reservation feature is to reserve within the visibility app, not perform a physical reservation in Dynamics FNO. So it's soft reserved, but then in FNO, we'll be able to kind of let that reservation go when we actually reserve it in FNO. So soft reservation means reserving within the visibility app. It doesn't do any kind of hard reservations in any of the data sources that are connected to visibility. It's only doing it within the app itself. And then in FNO, we have the parameters to set up something called Reservation Offset. And this is, again, something you will see in the demo soon, because if you reserve something in inventory visibility, and then you actually reserve it, or when you sell it in where you reserve it in F&O, you don't want to have a double reservation. That's where you can use the reservation offset functionality to make sure that F&O and the visibility app are in sync as near real time as possible. So that's what kind of this new feature, soft reservation, is all about. You can soft reserve quickly in the visibility app. And if you have third-party applications connected to that, that's a very good functionality to kind of limit. One of the key drivers in retail sales is kind of limit short picking, to limit the oversell, because that gives you a bad customer experience, right? And one of the issues I've seen many times with specifically F&O or any ERP is that you have a little disconnect between the e-commerce platform or any other sales platform and the actual on-hand, being F&O or AX or any ERP, that there's a disconnect here, and that you're able to sell based off a counter, and you always end up with a lot of short pick scenarios. So implemented correctly, a global insight into visibility where you can reserve, and everyone is using that. And that's the key point here. As long as every source system or end system is using the same source, same truth, then you should at least be able to limit it. So the soft reservation offset is a functionality here to kind of ensure that we don't do it the other way around, that we reserve too much and not get the sell that we need. All right, so that was a 15-minute at least quick overview of the setup. And again, I cannot stress the importance of looking at the docs and looking at the already done sessions from a number of people in the community on how to get this up and running. I will show you today a little bit about the LCS components I just spoke about. Setting up D365, working in Dataverse. We will do some stuff with Postman. We will also do some querying and validate the soft reservations. And one of the most interesting scenarios I see this is, and it's been, if you run D365 Commerce, you're kind of, well, you have MPOS and you have CloudPOS, and these are great POS tools, but the reality is that sometimes you might have a smaller business that runs a different POS. You might have a number of scenarios where you have another point of sale or other sales channel that need to operate towards your Dynamics implementation. And building it towards the commerce structure has not been that easy before. And if you just want to get the on-hand working, this is one of the scenarios I think it might make most sense to use it in. So I've built a demo for that we're going to show you shortly. Oh, I was too fast. Now I need to actually jump over to the demo part. So first things first, here is the LCS part. So if you're on the correct version and you have everything you need, then you can install the update. I've already done it here, but it's kind of going to the App Store. This is one of the real App Store parts here of business operations. You just go to your environment and you click install a new add-in. And since if you don't have it installed already, it will pop up in the list, and you just click install, and then you wait for a little while. And what it does then is install, of course, the LCS component. It installs on your Dataverse component here. It installs this application. And of course, sets up tables, entities, measurements, a lot of preparations. And in the background, you need to make sure and ensure that your authentication is set up right with Azure AD. Again, covered in a different topic. So I'm going to assume that you have this set up already. So the inventory visibility configuration app. This is a model-driven application that comes pre-installed or gets installed. You can install it manually if you like as well. If you just go to your Power Apps portal and you install it, it's there under as a Dynamics 365 application. You can install it. This is where you do, it's quite simplified. This is where you do your configurations. This is kind of a core setup of the visibility components. Now we're only working in Dataverse here. Nothing, if I do any changes here, nothing is sent back to D365 F&O. It's only doing changes in the configuration tables here in F&O. So I set up here, we're going to go through all of these in good time, but we have a product index hierarchy. This is basically how am I allowed to ask or query on-hand information. Site ID, this is default setup. I just use site location, and I can use, of course, dimensions, color, size, style. You can track it by batch or serial number, any way you like, but here is where you set that up. And you have your data sources as well. IV, of course, inventory visibility. You need to map dimensions, and you need to set up measurements. These are all pre-installed, as you see. So getting up and running test-wise is Not that complicated. You have FNO as well as a data source. Today, we're only going to look at these two. These are pre-installed as well. I think from a demo perspective, you could use any type of data source here as you want, but that data source will then have to build on-hand updates, etc., towards the Dataverse components. So FNO is handled within FNO and the batch service, as I illustrated before. But whatever type of other data sources you have, they will have to build their own towards the APIs that we have here as well. Before jumping over to FNO, we also have a lot of measurements that you need to set up. And this is where you can really have fun if you have different business scenarios where you want to use different measurements. The available to reserve is the key component that we're going to look at here, where you can, depending on how many data sources that you have, you can build your own calculated measurements, and you can build your own or set up your own structure on how much should I allow my different sources or systems to actually reserve. And what types of measurements do I want my users or my users of the visibility app to see? And you can build your own. Here you see we're additioning the on-hand information of all of these different data sources, and then we are subtracting what is reserved or on its way out here on these data sources. So you can build whatever you need here, but it's important to understand that this is something you build within Dataverse, and then it calculates off the data that you send from your different repositories, in this case, FNO. And here's where a lot of confusion comes in, specifically if you only, like me, at first at least, you read the documentation and then you get to understand how it works. Because if you just read, okay, there's a new feature called reservations, and if you work in 365 FNO, you might think feature management in FNO. Yes, that is true. You need to set it up there as well. There's also feature management within the visibility app itself that you need to be mindful of how you set it up. So these two I enabled, recommended to be enabled as well. This one specifically is to make the full raw on-hand list visible in Dataverse. So this little switch here lights up a lot of different Dataverse integration scenarios towards other Azure components, I would say, where you don't necessarily have to go through the visibility app itself with the APIs. You can just make use of the raw data that is replicated over to Dataverse. By enabling this switch here, you make it available. And the on-hand reservation feature, again, is what we're going to show you here, the soft reservation part. So we're doing soft reservations within Visibility app, not within the systems themselves. So I'm going to come back to the soft reservation, but this is, and then you have you have a little bit of an operational visibility here. You can do searches towards the on-hand within Dataverse. You could actually do a soft reservation here in this app as well, but it's a model-driven app within Power Apps that you can use to you could use it as it is, or you could use it to understand how it's built and structured, and then you can build your own within Dataverse. You also have the possibility to take out reports and lists, and you can understand how it's built to work towards Power BI, etc. So this is one component that comes when you install the add-in, so it's there automatically. Moving over to Dynamics FNO then, what happens when you have the add-in installed? First of all, as I showed you before, you need to enable the features. Feature management. The app. These two, as you can see, I set this up as before the summer to work with the previous version, but now we have the Reservation Offset addition, so we had to enable that one as well. These two give you the capability to actually enable the visibility inventory visibility to set it up. So you have an endpoint here. This is something you have to get from your configuration here. If you go to configuration, show service endpoint. And this is important because if you remember, go back to the architecture slide, the whole point of the visibility is to be scalable, right? So what this is telling me is that this endpoint is now deployed in West Europe on the island 104, which is a scale unit used within the Dataverse architecture. So you need to have this configured and set up, because otherwise, and it needs to be in the same LCS, well, West Europe at least, for it to work properly, or at least meet the near real-time requirements. So this one is important that you have when you set it up in FNO. And then you can, once this is set up, then it's replicated, so you can call the API from another of course, but then you're calling Dataverse scalability, and you're not scaling the FNO installation, you're scaling the Dataverse component. It's a very important note to make. This is a default value, maximum number of records. I have not changed it. I have not had the need to change it either. So just bear in mind that if you might need to increase it depending on your volumes. And this is the new feature that we're going to show you shortly here, the visibility reservation offset here. This is where you can set up, do I want to clear the reservation in visibility when I get the order in as an open order? Or do I want to clear it when I actually reserve it within FNO? So I set this up to be on reserve just to make the demo scenario a little bit more clear, but you can do whatever matches your business scenario if you need to use it at all. So once you're clear on the parameters, everything is set up, then what you do is you enable the integration. Now it's already enabled here, but you can disable it if you like. That will clear data. I won't do that because I think that will destroy my demo here. But when you enable it, it does two things. It takes a snapshot, it initiates it, and it sends it, and it creates two batch jobs, basically. One is the initial push job here. Here you see the initial push, and here you see my uninstallation and installation attempts. But the initial push, and then it configures the actual batch job that does the heavy lifting of sending the data to Dataverse. And here you have the recurrence 1 minute as default, and that is basically as near real time as you get because it's batch. So you can't really avoid that. It's not instant. You have to keep that in mind. It's not instant. But 1 minute is as good as it gets at this point, and otherwise you might have to do something else. You have to build a custom service or any other. But then you're querying towards FNO data and not Dataverse data. So consider your scalability needs and your performance needs, and do you really need to have the on hand faster than a minute? It's always a good question to get answered. All right, so now we have set up our add-in. We have looked at the configuration app here in Dataverse, and we have replicated, so everything is up and running. So now what do I do as a developer? I want to understand how the API calls work. So I use Postman first, just to get the grasp of how it's working. And again, in the documentation part of or the docs, then these are ready-made templates that you can import. You just need to modify the variables a little bit to get the correct token and configure the authentication, because this is Azure AD authentication. You need to get the token, you need to get the bearer token, and then authenticate towards your endpoint and your LCS environment ID here. So as a TV chef, I've already done and prepared that. Hopefully it hasn't expired. If it does, then I'll just show you how to get a new one. It's not a big problem. But before we go here, let's jump in and take an example product and look at how it looks right now in FNO. And I'm just going to take this one. It's not random. I used it to prepare. So we look at the on hand. And we're going to use Austin here because that's how I set it up. You can use a more accurate scenario for what I'm going to show you soon. Might be that you have another, like a pop-up store. You might have a different. This is, let's just say, I think this is a store warehouse. Let's just call it specific external warehouse. So you have 18 available here. Nothing is reserved. You have 18 available to sell. This is a BMX helmet or something, adult helmet. I don't know. If I then go into Postman and I know now for a fact that Dataverse is synced with FNO, so I configure and ask, okay, this product, Site Central, location Austin. And we get an okay response back. We see we have 18 ordered, 18 available. It's the same, so we are correct. We can also go here if we like to our little operational visibility application here. We can search for USRT, Site Central, location Austin, product 002. Same operation basically, but just illustrated in a more user-friendly way perhaps. So here you see the different measurements I showed you before. We have physical event, reserve ordered, reserve physical. These are all FNO measurements here. But over here we have available to reserve. This is a measurement that you configure here in your soft reservation mapping here. So what I'm saying is that for any other data source or for any component asking inventory visibility, how much is available for me to now reserve soft reservation? This is the measurement that we use to calculate that. And you can set up a soft reservation hierarchy saying, okay, at which levels do I allow other systems to reserve? Is it on location level, which is the demo part here? But you could define any kind of reservation hierarchy you like here within the visibility app. So starting point here is we have here, we have the get on-hand information. We have 18 available. If I then use my little reserve API call here, I'm going to do a soft reservation here of my helmet. I got a success. I also get a reservation ID. This is something we can keep in mind for later, but this is the success part, and this is actual real time. So now if I go back to my on-hand information and do a check again, now I get, if you go here, this is FNO. FNO has not changed. And this is what it's critical to understand, that when we do soft reservations, nothing is happening within FNO here. It's only within the IV part. Here you see available to reserve as decreased by 1 because you have a soft reservation on 1 here. Super critical. So reservations are not done towards the FNO, it's done towards the inventory visibility app. And you can release that reservation if you like by doing negative modifier and just skipping the check availability. You can do false here. Success again. I go back to my own hand and check. Now it's immediately released, right? So, and again, if I go to my own hand, if I go to sales orders here, I create a new one for, say, basketball stadium needs to buy a helmet. Makes sense. We reserve it towards Austin here. So, and now here's the near real-time component, right? So now we have to wait for the batch job to run for this to be updated. So if I do this now, I most likely still have 18 here. See? So that's a critical part to understand of how the functionality works and how fast it's being updated. I might just keep clicking send here and see how it's updated. And still here it's also available 18 because now I haven't done any soft reservation. I've just hard reserved it within FNO. And I need to wait for a little while for it to actually update to Dataverse. So I can keep sending here, keep pushing until it goes in. It'll take about a minute or so. So I implore you to kind of, gain an understanding how this fits into your scenario or your requirements, make sure that you understand how the difference is when we do reservations in different systems here. It's not doing anything. It's a one-way communication basically between FNO and inventory visibility. And that's not the purpose of the visibility app. It's not to do reservations in your business logic in whatever system you have. It's to provide as true as a snapshot as can be towards your global on hand right now. And the soft reservation component is part of making that as actual as it can be. Yeah, you see it's still 18 here. So let's leave it reserved because that will be a little bit clear shortly here. So now we know how the APIs work. We know how to get it tested. We understand a little bit about how you can work with setting it up, working with operational visibility. You can work with the forms here and you can build reports for it. So how about an actual scenario where how does it work and how do we work with the reservation offset? Now you have available physical 17. So now it's been updated towards or from reserve physical. So this is FNO. If I go back now to my Postman, I will get Yeah, you see 17. So now it's updated. So again, near real time. It's as fast as can be. Depends on if you're lucky to catch the batch job running at the exact time. Then you get as much real time as you can be. But still, it's close enough to near real time. Depends on your needs. So now I see reserve physical 1. I go back to Dynamics, F&O, and I delete my sales order. Yes, I will delete it. I will very shortly create a new one and show you how. And another scenario, now we've seen APIs, we've seen on-hand query tools using Postman. Like I said before, a scenario that I think is valid, at least, is to actually run another POS than modern POS, at least, or any type of sales channel. It can be a pop-up store or anything you need, basically. So I built a quick one in Power Apps, an Acme demo POS. And Acme, you might know, is a company that makes everything, of course. This is their retail branch. They are very agile here. It's a CFO-friendly POS. You only have a big buy button. You don't have any type of return functionality at all, so you can just sell. So it's a very good POS, but it's very kind of limited. It's a good demo perspective. So here it's a Power App. It's making use of the same APIs I just showed you here in Postman, but they are also built as a flow or Power Automate. You could build this in Logic Apps in any type of integration engine you like. I built 2, one for check availability and one for soft reserve. It's quite simple and it's very fast to build to kind of do a proof of concept scenario again here. So I wanted to buy my helmet. I'm at the pop-up store somewhere, and I know this pop-up store is trying to kind of sell all of the goods I have at Austin just to get them out. So I built this quick POS for them. I need to check my availability. I hope my token has not expired. No, it hasn't. So now I have 17. Because my sales order that I just deleted has not yet synced over to Dataverse. So if I keep clicking my check availability here, it will soon come over to 18, I hope. It doesn't really matter. We're going to show you shortly. So if you remember, going back here to the visibility app, I think I have it still here. Now it's 18. So we should have 18, exactly. Now it came back. So in my soft reservation mapping, I've said available to reserve is the measurement that I want to display to my other third-party sales channels here. And my demo POS is using exactly that. I also gave it the F&O just to illustrate. So I have 18. Okay, so I want to buy one. I buy one here, I pay for it, and now I get the reservation ID back. And this is important because now if I quit this one and I check availability, now I have 17 instantly. So that's real time. That's not asynchronous or anything. That's real time updates towards the Dataverse cache. So here's where you can reduce your short pick or your oversell capability by making sure that your systems are using the available to reserve measurement and not the F&O measurement. That's important. So now I bought it, and hopefully somewhere down here I have some kind of order coming in, file-based via BizTalk, jumping through a couple of servers, and in the end coming to Dynamics as a real sales order. But that's not near real time unless you build something else, but then you don't maybe need to use the reservation functionality. In my scenario here, this is a replication solution, so the order is coming in later, and it might not be reserved later because that's just a demand here. So the offset part here is where we want to make sure that we don't reserve too much. So if I again here start and create a new sales order, 101, let's use the same one. And item number 2. Now I'm in Austin, I'm in Central, and here is another component of the visibility app, which you need to implement into your integrations if you want to use this functionality. You have the inventory visibility reservation ID. So when I clicked my little sell button here, I need to make sure that my integration also carries this reservation ID all along the way until the actual order comes in. So typical e-commerce scenario, you reserve the amount when the customer puts it in the cart, but they don't actually get it until you pick it. and because you need to be sure that it's actually there, right? So it's the same scenario here. So if I go back, and here I now need to tell the visibility app that, okay, I am now reserving towards that reservation that was done in my Akime pools over here. And if you remember as well, I set the modifier to be physically reserved. If I'd changed it to be open order, then this would have already offset the reservation in inventory visibility. But now nothing happens until I go and do the actual reservation. And let's set it to 1 here, reserve lot, done. And now we go back and do the fun, click F5. So here I still see the same thing, right? Because now we need to ensure that when I now reserve this in F&O, because the, oh, I closed it, I can just open it up again. Here we go. If you remember, the calculated measure here available to reserve takes every data source into account. So without the offset, I would have reserved too much, because then I have a soft reservation in the visibility app, and I also have a hard reservation in the F&O app. So the offset component is very important here, because that will tell visibility that that previous reservation that was done is now offset by the F&O component here. So let's see, coming back to operational visibility, we will look at the organization. USRT, Site Central, Austin, and 2. So query. Here we see available physical 17, because this is what we've reserved. And now we have reserved, soft reserved order is still 1. I think that needs to be cleared out. It might be the API I called before. So let's see if we can get that cleared out. Yeah, now it's clear. So you see the point with the near real time, you need to understand how the flow is working in order to match your business scenario here, because now you see there was a little bit of a delay here, where you actually had a mismatch between F&O and visibility. So depending on the timing here, it's important to understand how this works and how you can use the reservation offset to kind of ensure that you are in sync between the two. All right. So a little bit of a summary. As I showed you before, this is to get things started, you need to, if you have the prerequisites, you need to have an implementation project up and running, but it's quite easy to get it up and running using the default setup. Here is where you need to spend your time understanding how to map the different dimensions. But I would argue that just getting it up and getting the table synced to Dataverse is a very big gain in itself, because it lights up all of these different scenarios. I built this little application just yesterday, just using Power Apps. It's a very fast and efficient way to proof of concept different things and to test and to see how it works and how it matches your scenario. And I think the whole reservation offset, you need to understand, do we have an issue here with how we work with reservations within ERP? Or could it work for this scenario that we have over here? So I hope this session has given you an better understanding of how to practically work with the visibility tool and how to query it, and specifically on the reservations part, because it can be a little bit confusing when we use the same terminology across, right? We have 365 customer experience working with sales and reservations towards the visibility app, and then we have actual hard reservations within the ERP. So make sure you understand this when you think about how this applies to your scenario. And again, you can also do direct on-hand updates. So there's a number of functionalities here that I haven't shown you. That, like I said, there are a number of very good sessions taken before me, focusing on some of the other components where you can actually set on-hand, you can override it. You can use the functionality that you have within IV to make sure that you are in sync. But one of the biggest benefits here is that you're not querying all of this towards your F&O data source. It's towards the scalable part of Dataverse here. And that architecture, I think, is one of the key benefits. And again, if it's in Dataverse, you light up a lot of scenarios here with Power Automate, Power BI, and with low code development. So I implore you to get it up and running and test at least to see if it matches your scenario. And I think that was basically it from me. It's 45 minutes. We have some time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing because we'll see how it looks in StreamYard if we have any questions. No questions or comments. Oh, sorry, I had to change tab here. Could we have used a business event to register the deletion of sales order and trigger a faster Power Automate? Oh, you mean, yeah, of course. You mean to update? Yes, that is true. But I think the risk if you use a business event to kind of override, if I understand your question correctly, what you meant was, if I share my screen again. So to avoid the kind of near real-time delay that you get here, if we use a business event to trigger it. Again, business events, it can also be a batch job. It depends on how you set up the business event. So business events are synchronous, and if you do not enable the batch job. So I don't think you will get that much of a speed gain if that was what you were after. And at the same time, there is not much you can do about the inventory visibility replication itself. It's low-level SQL replication. So getting the data from F&O to Dataverse is not something you can, well, you can, but I don't suggest that you do it, override it, because it might conflict with updates coming later on in the visibility app. What you should rather do is to work with your reservation hierarchies and make sure that you have the time needed to work with the way the system works. I'm not sure if I caught your question correctly, but I think that's it, right? If I would like to get a snapshot of the complete inventory, yes, 2-3 times a day. No, I think that's Alexis asked the question if to get a snapshot of the complete inventory to use as an integration with another system 2-3 times a day. I would argue that yes, it is a good idea to use this app. You could. It depends on how much you want to support, I would say. If I go back to the architecture picture here, you could, if you have a need to just send a snapshot of on hand, you could set up a BYOD, just push it out, or data lake, just push it out and then have someone else pick it up. But then you're putting strain here on the export jobs, and in the BYOD part, you need to make sure that jobs are running. In the visibility app component, you can rely on the low-level SQL replication that is provided by the service, and you kind of offset the performance impact towards Dataverse instead. So just if you have that need, and if you just use the app for that need, that's a good thing, because then you also at the same time light up these different scenarios, because you might not know what you need in the future. So I would say yes, I think it's a good scenario to use, and keep in mind to enable this option then under the configuration part. You have feature management. Enable this one, on-hand most specific background service, to make full raw on-hand list visible in Dataverse. And then you can use any kind of integration component to put it out and push it as CSV or tool of your choice. Right, let's see if we have any more. Okay, so if we have no further questions, I would like to thank all of you for joining and listening to my little practical walkthrough here of how to use and how to consider, I would say, the visibility app, because I think it's a very good addition to the more microservice-oriented architecture that Microsoft's coming with now, with all of the different components out, where scalability is one thing, but also usability, because once you get it into Dataverse, as I said, you have a number of different scenarios which make things easier, specifically from a testing point of view. Does this work for us? Why not set it up and try it to see if it works? Because I think also, at least for the visibility app, the product team are very, from my experience, very good to get to know, because they are quick to respond, and it's very well documented on docs as well. So I think you should be covered to get this up and running. All right. Thank you all. Thank you for listening.